It's no surprise that 2021 has been difficult for a lot of game developers and creators. While we are okay as an audience with any of these studios taking a minute with their launch schedules, it's pretty obvious that some of them were just not interested and more or less rushed to get their games out there. What that meant was a number of disappointing releases, and today we're going to be checking out the 7 most disappointing games of 2021 already. Number 7. Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 isn't exactly a 2021 game, as the PC version came out in 2020 and people spent hundreds of hours over the Series X or PS5 version. However, PS4 and Xbox One versions were urged to hold off until much later, that is 2021, when things will be much more stable. CD Projekt Red soon began working on hotfixes and long-form patches for the versions of the game, which were by far the most afflicted. To be honest, these are still versions of the game that have trouble maintaining a consistent frame rate or avoiding crashes. There are a slew of patch notes for minor issues, but it's clear that the PS4 and Xbox One versions of Cyberpunk should have been cancelled or made into distinctly different editions of the game, similar to how Ubisoft released completely different versions of Splinter Cell Double Agent when porting from Xbox to Xbox 360. Regardless, CDPR had to put a stop to these versions of the games at some point, and with them claiming that what players had is acceptable, it's apparent that this is as good as it gets. Thus, Cyberpunk 2077 was one of the biggest disappointments of 2021 after the exceptional 2020 release and the overhype. Number 6. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Stormground. This shouldn't come as a surprise to Warhammer fanatic, as the series' games are typically hit or miss. Nonetheless, a turn-based tactic game set in the Age of Sigmar with several acts and parts seemed intriguing. The aesthetic and roguelike features of Stormground, such as acquiring different units and powers during a run, were also appealing in the beginning. However, as you progress through the game, you'll discover that the roguelike method of dying is irritating. The campaign material is limited, and there are much more problems than the total number of gamers online. Even without these flaws, the gameplay feels underdeveloped, lacking many of the quality of life elements and fundamental functions seen in other turn-based games. The game isn't very well suited for a controller, and the UI is, well, atrocious. The new unlocked units, the plot, and the universe's overall structure all pleasantly entice you in. Bizarre design decisions, on the other hand, simply serve to push you away. This game might be great with a few tweaks, but the way it's now set up doesn't help it. While it isn't the worst of games that we've seen and might even feel good to some beginners, an overpriced tag as well as lengthy and challenging campaign makes it obvious for it to be mentioned on this list. Number 5. Biomutant. I have to admit, mentioning Biomutant on this list was a strangely difficult choice, as it's not easy to completely analyze this game. It's not a negative title to avoid, nor is it one where creatives were denied the chance to fulfill their visions or where a project was slashed to bits to meet a deadline. None of that. Biomutant is like a Frankenstein's monster, a mashup of elements from various games with all the promising concepts that we loved being wasted in the process. The journey through its villages, farms, and bunkers is without mystery or weight in terms of connection constructions. There's not even a worthy fighting challenge to keep it all together. It wastes a setting that had considerably more promise, with so many concepts left underdeveloped. Biomutant is a complex project, but it never succeeds in any of its aspirations. All of this meant that nothing really stood out, and the storytelling approach from the obnoxious narrator, who can now luckily be turned off, to the uninteresting characters and cliched situations didn't appeal either. Biomutant looks decent, but it's impossible to shake the feeling that it falls short in every important area. It's easy to say that Biomutant is surely one name on the list we all hope would have turned out better. Number 4. Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood. With the entire recent Vampire the Masquerade volumes, Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood sounds like a refreshing change of pace, providing a different viewpoint from the world of darkness. Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood, being an action RPG set in a gothic fantasy punk setting featuring werewolves that approaches contemporary problems like ecology, seemed interesting, yet it fails at every turn. Cyanide's game is a huge letdown, both technically and in terms of playability. While we weren't expecting a complete Ripple A experience, it certainly appeared that it would have some good combat, but as you might predict, things became a lot worse. The plot moves at a rapid rate that explains very little, the fighting is poor, the sights are awful, and there's no joy in tearing people apart as a huge werewolf. Even die-hard World of Darkness fans will be disappointed by the lack of engaging role-playing or lore. Werewolf The Apocalypse Earthblood has no charm chance due to its ridiculous plot, mediocre gameplay, and subpar graphics. The single biggest reason for you to play it is to remind yourself of how terrible and ridiculous video games can become. The critics haven't been very kind to the game either, and make sure to avoid it at all costs. Number 3. Taxi Chaos. As much of a throwback to Crazy Taxi as Taxi Chaos is, the experience seems very shallow and unfulfilling due to the lack of choices and the fast tiring nature of it all. More cars and personalities, as well as fresh places and passengers that don't repeat the same few sentences over and again, are needed to spice up the gameplay. The list of things that Taxi Chaos got wrong would be the lack of vehicles and characters, as well as better and new locations, and passengers that unmistakably repeat the same few lines again and again. Pair that with the insignificant and forgettable soundtrack compared to the original one, which was the heart of the Crazy Taxi, and you arrive at a game with the name Taxi Chaos, which got everything from A to Z wrong. Let's not forget the absurd price tag for a third of which you can still get the original Crazy Taxi. To sum it up, Taxi Chaos excels in driving away its customers, just like the cabbies in the game. Number 2. Destruction All-Stars. Destruction All-Stars appeared to suit the vehicle combat genre well from the minute it was introduced, offering its own unique twists on the concept. However, the game was soon realized to be totally uninteresting. The characters all have a similar feel about them, and their playstyles are almost identical. Cosmetics and challenge microtransactions are a nightmare. Even as a free game, it is extremely lacking in replay value because there is no plot to speak of. It's okay if you want to play for 20 minutes, but it immediately becomes monotonous and dull. All of the stadiums have the same vibe. Since you don't have any music playing, the game feels far less complete. Having to pay premium currency, which couldn't be obtained in-game at release, to buy single-player championship series obviously didn't help too. The step down by Lucid Gaming from a $70 price tag to eventually letting people play it for free on PlayStation Plus for 2 months before selling it for $20 is evidence enough of how largely disappointing Destruction All-Stars turned out to be. Number 1. Dungeons and Dragons Dark Alliance. Finally, the number 1 on our list, and with not much doubt on many such lists, is the Dungeons and Dragons Dark Alliance. Why? If you're planning to use the name Dark Alliance, a name that evokes some of the best role-playing game experiences from the whole PS2 library for countless of us, you better do it properly. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance had a beautiful HD re-release exactly 1 month before the reworking that became Dungeons and Dragons Dark Alliance. Unfortunately, this new edition packed anything and everything that could be soulless and slapped together. A 4-person squad structure is the rule of the day, of course, and there are heaps upon heaps of bugs, glitches, and a general lack of polish with an illogical loot crawl and waves of forgettable opponents. Dungeons and Dragons Dark Alliance has some good ideas, but the lack of enemy variety, repetitive levels, poor puzzles, a shockingly bad plotline, the lack of local co-op, several quality of life issues, and numerous bugs that affect every aspect of the game make it difficult to recommend it to anyone, regardless of how much they enjoy the source material. The game has proved to be nothing but a blot on the beloved franchise, a paramount example of disappointment. These games were complete disappointments, whether it was due to huge expectations or lacking improvements over the predecessors. Which of these did you consider buying initially? Tell us in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to be a part of this gaming community.